So, Tucker Carlson was just interviewed on Channel 13 here in Israel. Now, it did not go well. Channel 13, for those of you outside of Israel or who don't know, Channel 13 is like left-wing mainstream media. These people who think that they're so smart. Doing this interview was a massive mistake. It handed Tucker a huge win. He of course put the clip up. In fact, the video I'm using is from his channel. He proudly showed this clip, and all of his fans are just like, look at Tucker owning this idiot on Channel 13 in Israel, owning the Israelis, owning the Jews, which is true because the guy who interviewed him is a fool and didn't properly push back on the arguments Tucker was making. Maybe he agrees with some of them. I have no idea. I think the guy just was not prepared, didn't know what on earth he was doing. And of course, Tucker always goes after Israel. But this interview is painful to watch, and I'm not going to play the whole thing. He had so many opportunities to push back on Tucker, and he didn't do it. So what I'm going to do in this video, I'm just going to play a few short clips of things that Tucker said and give you what the proper pushback would have been, because this interviewer just blew it. So let's go to, let's pull it up here. Let's go to clip 1. Here we go.
But the behavior of the Israeli government in Gaza is disgusting and immoral. And of course, Israel's not a democracy in any sense. There are millions of people who live under Israeli control who cannot vote, right? And so if the West Bank, Judea and Samaria and Gaza, or whatever we're calling these places, which Israel has controlled since 1967, have people living in them who have no control over the government that controls their lives, which is true, it's not a democracy. So let's just drop the talking points. I agree with you on self-defense. I don't think killing children is self-defense. It never will be.
What on earth is he saying here? He's saying that Israel's not a democracy because of the Palestinians, the Arabs living in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. And here's the answer that he should have been given. Judea and Samaria is governed under the Oslo Accords, a framework that Israel did not impose on those people unilaterally. It was negotiated between Israel and the leadership representing the Palestinian people. It was signed on the White House lawn in 1993. That started the whole process. Now, under Oslo, the Palestinian Authority, which is elected or supposed to be elected, I mean, they had elections in the early years of the Palestinian Authority. They haven't had an election since like 2006, 2005 or 2006 was the last time they had an election. Mahmoud Abbas, the current president of the Palestinian Authority, whatever his title is now serving whatever the 20th or 21st year, whatever it is, of a 4-year term. But Israel did not impose this system on them. They run Palestinian civil life, courts, schools, taxation, services. They could say whatever they want. I mean, it's not up to Israel. Israel controls security for its own self-defense. That's the agreement. So when Tucker says the Palestinians have no control of the government that controls their lives, he's ignoring the entire legal and political framework that they actually live under. Okay, now for Gaza, this is even more pronounced. Israel withdrew from Gaza completely in 2005. Every soldier, every civilian, and then the Gazans held democratic elections in 2006, and they elected Hamas. And Hamas then violently seized power threw the opposition members off the rooftops and has held exactly 0 elections ever since. And the reason that Gazans have no say in their government is Hamas, a terrorist organization that rules by force and has no interest in democracy. So Tucker's blaming Israel for Hamas's dictatorship, or is he talking about the fact that Israel externally has control over what happens there because Israel looks out for its own security? I want to make another point here on that, about that. Tucker keeps saying that Israel controls the lives of millions of people who can't vote. But by that logic, the United States is not a democracy either. Millions of people in countries affected by American foreign policy can't vote in American elections. Every sovereign nation makes decisions that affect people beyond its borders. It's not the absence of democracy, but It's a ridiculous claim. And the interviewer did not push back at all. All right, let's go to the next thing that Tucker said. Here we go.
I agree with you on self-defense. I don't think killing children is self-defense. It never will be. And no amount of recounting the legitimate atrocities of October 7th will ever get me to accept this behavior from the Israeli government, from the U.S. government, from the Iranian government, or any government. It's always wrong. And Israel doesn't like to acknowledge the existence of universal principles.
It's always wrong to kill children. Okay, that's a winning point. Tucker keeps talking about killing children. It ends the conversation. And the interviewer took the bait. He got emotional and defensive, which is exactly what Tucker wanted. Now, here's what he should have said to him. He should have said, Israel kills children? Whose numbers are you using, Tucker? How do you know that Israel's killed a lot of children? Because the only source for Gaza casualty figures is Hamas's own health ministry. And according to those numbers, not a single person killed since October 7th in Gaza was a Hamas combatant. Tucker, do you believe that 0 Hamas combatants were killed? Not only that, Tucker, do you believe that there were no deaths from natural causes in the Gaza Strip since October 7th? Because according to the numbers that you're using to say that Israel killed thousands of children, every single, according to their database of the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, every single death in the Gaza Strip, every single death was from a military strike and was a civilian. No fighters, no Hamas casualties at all, because if you look at the database, there's none, and no death from natural causes. Meaning, this is not just, they don't just publish the casualties from the war. Hamas, the Gaza Health Ministry publishes all of the deaths, and this has been carefully studied. It's been studied by a number of researchers, most notably Andrew Fox at the Henry Jackson Society out of England. They studied these databases in detail. And, so that's the pushback. I would say, how do you know that Israel has killed all these children? He also should have pushed back by noting the experts like John Spencer from West Point, the expert on urban warfare, the world's leading expert on urban warfare, who have pointed out that even if you accept whatever numbers we know to be true, the civilian to combatant casualty ratio is the lowest, meaning the most favorable in the history of urban warfare. The genocide charge against Israel, the number that really demolishes it is that Gaza's population has grown since October 7th. The population is larger today than it was before the war began. You can't simultaneously commit genocide and grow the population of the people you're genociding. And then there's the other issue that the interviewer never brought up, which drives me crazy. When Hamas stores weapons in hospitals and fires rockets from schoolyards and runs its command centers from underneath hospitals and mosques, which they do, which they've openly admitted. We know that. No one disputes that. I don't think Tucker would dispute that. If he would, he'd look like the fool. You have to put him on the defensive. This guy didn't do that even once. When Hamas does that, those sites, those civilian locations lose their civilian protected status according to the Geneva Conventions. Article 19 says it explicitly. And more than that, there's the issue of legal and moral responsibility, which is worked out also in the Fourth Geneva Convention, not in Article 19. The legal and moral responsibility for civilian casualties shifts to the party that militarized a civilian site if that civilian site is hit. So if a hospital is turned into a Hamas command center and it gets hit and there are civilians killed, according to international law, the responsibility then moves to the party that militarized the site. If human beings are used as human shields, if civilians are used as human shields, the responsibility for their deaths is not on the attacker. It's on the one who used them as a human shield. Hamas has been open about the fact that they use human shields, that it's part of their strategy. They've said it themselves. They need the dead children. They deliberately position their military infrastructure to ensure that when Israel strikes, civilians will die. So the entity that is responsible for the proper response would have been dead children in Gaza, however many they were, is a terrible tragedy. And according to international law, Hamas is responsible for them. And Israel, meanwhile, is trying to minimize those deaths while fighting an enemy that's trying to maximize them. This guy didn't push back on any of this. I mean, this interview did real damage. So irresponsible, unbelievably irresponsible by Channel 13. Now check out this clip. This one really is just nutso.
Well, Israel does commit terrorism and brags about it. Setting off pagers in the pockets of people when you don't know who those people are is terrorism.
They know who they are. They are Hezbollah terrorists. And this is what countries doing to defend themselves.
No, that is not true. That is what you're saying is not true. Israel did not, the morning that it detonated those pagers, know who was holding the pagers. And people who committed no crime.
There were pagers of Hezbollah terrorists, unless you are not acknowledging Hezbollah as a terror organization. Do you think maybe it's some kind of a party, like the Democratic Party? I don't know, or the Republican Party.
Right. I'm not defending Hezbollah. I'm merely saying
this Udi Segal, who was interviewing him, thought that he was catching him by saying, "Oh, are you saying that Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization?" That's obviously Tucker's gonna respond and say, "Of course, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization." It's the wrong way to approach these arguments. Okay, Tucker calls the pager operation terrorism. And this one it's a moral inversion that is so complete, it's almost impressive. Think about this. The pager operation, the pagers were distributed through Hezbollah's own military supply chain to Hezbollah operatives, to senior Hezbollah operatives. Those are the only people who got them. They have tens of thousands of operatives, right? And there was a limited number of people who had these. These were all people in command positions. Tucker says Israel didn't know who was holding them. It's absurd. The answer isn't, it's a terrorist organization. The answer is this was a communication device for highly sensitive information given only to senior operatives. There is no chance that they would let their wife or their kid or their cousin hold the pager. It's absurd. Of course, Israel knew who was holding them, but it's also beside the point. Okay, that's not even the main point to push back on here. There's actually a bigger issue. The pager operation needs to be understood in its full context, alongside Israel's strategy that we see all the time of these precision-targeted strikes on leaders. Right, taking people out with these precise targeted strikes. We see it all the time. We've seen it in Iran. We see it in Gaza. We saw it in Lebanon. Right, the way they took out Ismail Haniyeh, blowing him up in the room he was staying in Iran. Right, on Sinwar, strikes that kill the most guilty person with minimal or zero collateral damage, and that's what Tucker's missing, and what almost everyone misses. And this is why it's such an inversion. He's calling it terrorism when actually, and I'll explain this, the pager operation was actually the most moral form of warfare probably ever practiced in human history. Because think of what the alternative is. Let's say you have a Hezbollah military command compound. Imagine that. Okay, so let's back up. Hezbollah attacks Israel right after October 7th. Unprovoked. Israel is not at war with Hezbollah at that point because of what's going on in Gaza. Hezbollah starts firing rockets at Israeli towns. They declare war on Israel. So now, so far so good. Israel is now going to fight a just war, and Hezbollah targets are now legitimate targets for Israel. So let's say there's a Hezbollah command center, and you don't have all this precise intelligence, but you know that there's a lot of Hezbollah operatives there, and that's their command center, and you bomb it. There could be someone there who's a cook, or who's the janitor who's washing the floors, or someone who was just there using the bathroom, or who knows what. You don't know who you're killing, but you bomb the Hezbollah command center. Is that legitimate? Of course it's legitimate in warfare. That's a more conventional strike. And the other people who die, the janitor and the person who was using the bathroom and whoever else might be in the building, the secretary who doesn't really know what's going on in the building, who aren't really guilty, are legitimate collateral damage in that building. But instead, what does Israel do? They spent many, many years and who knows how much money developing this intelligence and technology to surgically remove the terrorist commanders who are most culpable while leaving the civilian population around them untouched. It's the most remarkable thing. It's like imagine if you launched a bomb and the only people who were killed by it were the most guilty people. And Tucker's outraged by the precision. What he's actually arguing for without realizing it is less precision, more indiscriminate warfare with more civilian casualties. What is he arguing? Because under international law, military commanders are lawful targets by virtue of their status and their role. You don't need a criminal conviction. This isn't terrorism. Terrorism is the opposite of this. Terrorism is when you target civilians. And here, Israel specifically taking out commanders in a way that only affects them and doesn't affect the civilians around them. The pager operation was designed to only take out the worst terrorists. It's the opposite of terrorism. Tucker has it completely backwards, and that interviewer just sat there and took it. Unbelievable. All right, last clip. Last one.
And Israel, again, which I've always liked as a country, has a lot of civilized, decent people living there to this day, has to acknowledge that principles are universal. They apply to everyone, even you, even me.
Principles are universal. Moral principles are universal. Thank you, Tucker Carlson. The sanctimony is unbelievable. Anyway, what's he saying here? Tucker's entire rhetorical framework in this interview is universal principles. They apply the same standard to everyone. Sounds reasonable, sounds fair. The interviewer bought it completely, never challenged it. Here's the problem. Universal principles do apply to everyone, and that includes the principle that is most foundational to the laws of war, which Tucker conveniently ignores. It's called distinction. The entire structure of international humanitarian law rests on one core distinction between combatants who deliberately target civilians as a military strategy and military forces that target combatants and accept the fact that there will be civilian casualties as a tragic but unavoidable byproduct of war. And you read through the Geneva Conventions, it's all about kind of navigating this. But that's what war is. And this distinction between those who target civilians deliberately, like Hezbollah, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, literally, the only target for their rockets is Israeli towns, is civilians. That's what they do intentionally. Iran also with their ballistic missiles to Israel, literally firing them into population centers. And between that and an army that is trying to minimize or avoid civilian casualties while achieving its military objectives, which is permissible, that's war, they're not legally equivalent. They're not equivalent in any framework that could be called moral. Hamas and Hezbollah embed their weapons in hospitals, in schools, in mosques by deliberate design. Their own spokesmen have said so. It's not a secret. They do it specifically because it makes Israel's military task more difficult. And because when Israel strikes, the resulting images of civilian casualties serve their propaganda warfare purposes. It's a strategy built on the death of their own people. So Tucker says he cares about universal principles. Does he apply that principle to Hamas? Does he name what Hamas is doing as terrorism? In this interview, he said that Iran's behavior is in some cases disgusting. Some cases. That's the moral framework he's bringing to the conversation. What Israel is doing is the opposite of what Hamas is doing. Israel warns civilians before strikes. Israel drops leaflets. It makes phone calls. I mentioned before Colonel John Spencer. Colonel John Spencer is the head of urban warfare studies at West Point, not an Israeli, not a Zionist advocate, He's only the world's leading expert on urban combat. He said on record that Israel has done more than any other military in history to protect civilian lives. But Tucker knows better. Tucker's erasing the most important distinction in the laws of war and calling it moral clarity. See, what Tucker's doing is he's equating every death with murder, and that all war is basically evil. There's no concept of a just reason to fight, because Tucker's dealing in an amoral construct. There is no good and evil in the construct he's talking about. So there's no good actors and bad actors for him. It's very sick. Every one of the arguments that I've made was readily available to the interviewer. I don't know what research he did. I don't know if he watched a lot of what Tucker says about Israel and prepared for what the responses would be. I doubt he did any preparation at all. That's the arrogance of these fools on outlets like Channel 13. The casualty numbers, the Geneva Conventions, the democracy question, the targeting, the beeper attack, the pager attack, whatever you call it. This is not rocket science. You just have to prepare yourself. And everything Tucker Carlson said in this interview about Israel, he says all the time. With minimal preparation, a far better job could have been done. I'm not saying this interview was even a good idea. But if you're going to sit across from him and try to defend Israel, you better come ready. And this interviewer was not ready at all. All right, that's my rant for today. Thank you for watching, and God bless.